It's time for the College of Bass with Kevin VanDam and Steve Pennaz.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to College of Bass, presented by Plano. Thanks for joining us tonight. Kevin VanDam will be joining us in just a second. Hey, our goal for College of Bass is the same every week. We just simply want to help you catch more fish by giving you direct access to some of the top bass anglers across the country. We're going to be airing every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central for the next several weeks. And if you miss an episode, don't worry about it, because the sites that you're watching us on right now will have the all the episodes saved as videos, so you can go back and study a topic or rewatch a show or do whatever you'd like on it. But the good news is that it's going to be available. Hey, let's bring Kevin VanDam in, man. Kevin, you've had a busy week.
Yeah, man. It's God, I can't believe how cold it is when I got back home. I know you, and it's reaching all across the country. So I think everybody's feeling it. You know, I'm looking at the weather. I've got a tournament coming up in Texas. We got Red Crest coming up there at Lake Palestine, and I'm just amazed at this. Like, this reminds me of the polar vortex a few years ago.
It's supposed to be 20 below here on Sunday. And then I get texts from friends down in Florida enjoying the 80, 81, and it's tempting. But what's the temperature supposed to be in Texas during Red Crest?
Well, right now the long-term forecast is still it's going to be pretty cold, but hopefully we get a warming trend for the actual competition days. But it's those cold nights, they just hold things back. You know, I mean, you hope for a warming trend, you want good fishing, but honestly, sometimes it's better when they are pre-spawn and they're congregated together, and that's when it can be really magical. So it's just a little trickier to find them.
Jeez. Hey, we got a lot to cover tonight. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to talking to you about is your approaches to finding fish and really kind of focusing on that part of it. The other thing is, when do you stay and when do you go? I mean, when you're on fish and they're not going, you make the switch, and that's probably the toughest decision a lot of anglers have to make, and including yourself.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. It's always a challenge. You find a productive spot or a productive area, you get a few bites, and it's like, hey, should I grind it out here? And there's a lot of variables in that. But today, the anglers are so good that in a lot of cases, you may find that area, you're power fishing, you're covering water. That's my style, but you have to maximize the number of fish you catch. So that's when, you got to pull out the finesse techniques. And, I've tried to morph my speed, power into finesse as well. And, I've got some theories on that too. So it's a tough situation. A lot of it is just what you feel personally yourself. But in the last handful of years, have really turned to finesse in a lot of cases, and actually won several events fishing, exactly opposite that most people would expect.
In a little while, we got Bassmaster Classic winner Ott Defo coming in, and I look forward to just sitting back and listening to you two talk about a lot of different topics in this thing. But the other thing is, and I know you're a huge fan of having fan interaction, and so we're going to take a lot of questions as well.
Yeah, that's really important. That's one thing, you and I have talked about this, is we really want to give the viewers what they want to hear about. And the best way to do that is to send your questions in. We've got a lot of them queued up, some good questions that we had from last week's episode, and we'll continue to do that. They come ripping across the bottom of the screen, and we go through a lot of them as we see them. But, we definitely want to keep that going, and that gives us ideas for future topics. Again, the goal of this show is to help everyone be more efficient on the water. I learn from the questions that I get asked. I know you do too. So it's a lot of fun. We're all bass heads. We love this. And we just want to be able to try to make it the most useful we can for everybody that's watching.
The good news is too, is if we don't get a chance to answer some of these questions, we'll save those for next week. So if you have a good question, it's likely we're going to be covering it next week. By the way, I already saw it come across the screen. Never leave fish to find fish. So there's a sentiment
Amen.
going on that. Yeah. Hey, before we go any further, just to make sure everybody is aware of this, everybody who tunes in tonight is actually eligible to win a Plano prize pack in the College of Bass Sweepstakes, and it's worth $275. And Kevin, there's some great stuff in there.
Yeah, we've got a lot of my favorite Edge boxes, and yours for that matter. We've got a great Strike King lure kit. We've got this the Edge whole kit, a KVD bag. We've got the College of Bass Yeti cup. So thanks to Yeti. I mean, that's the one, I'll promise you, this is the one sponsor product that I use every single day. I wake up with my Yeti cup and, I've just got water in it right now, but it doesn't always have water.
So if you guys want to try, have a shot at winning that tonight, we just want you to be involved. So send us comments, like and share the program. If you have questions, send them in, and I can guarantee you the more active you are tonight, the better the odds that you're going to really have a chance to win tonight. And the winner will be announced at the end of the show. So stick around. That'll be kind of fun. Hey, Kevin, last week we really went deep into pre-spawn bass. And one of the questions that came in from John Creek was, how much does daily weather affect movement of pre-spawn bass? We didn't get a chance to get to that last week, and I just wanted to run that by you tonight.
There's no doubt. I mean, I'm a weather junkie. Every serious bass fisherman I know really is. And during the pre-spawn, it is critical. I mean, these fronts, just like we're getting this right now that's sweeping across the country, it doesn't necessarily move them, but it's going to hold them back. It's going to keep them kind of in their wintering areas and things like that. And likewise, a warm front coming in, low pressure system, bringing some rain and wind and things like that. A lot of times can get those fish moving up and being active. Another thing that I really look for early in the spring like this, even way before they spawn, is the moon phase. So that moon triggers movement, even though the water temperature might not even be close to them spawning. It's funny how in real cold water, they'll sniff around some of those spawning areas on a full moon. So I always keep that moon phase in mind, and I'm watching that weather, and as it gets cold and as it gets warm, I'm just kind of thinking about where they want to be and where they're coming from, and just kind of keeping that in mind, and then using whatever structure and cover, because structure and cover are very different. Structure is that depth change, that's that edge, it's the creek channel, it's the drop, it's the it's structure to me is some type of depth change, and cover is the grass, the rocks, the wood, the stumps, bridge piling, whatever it is. And they don't always relate to cover, but they definitely always use structure as they migrate in and out.
I think we'd all agree that probably the most difficult thing that most anglers struggle with is actually finding fish. And so yeah. I don't care if you're fishing weekend or if you're pre-fishing for a tournament, but what is the process that you're using, maybe ahead of the game or during, once you're on the water? What is your process for getting on fish as quickly as possible?
Well, first and foremost, you have to follow the seasonal patterns. There's legwork you do before you ever get to the water. I want to, know that what the general seasonal pattern is. I'm going to be watching the weather. I'm going to be seeing the weather trends. So not only what it's going to be when I'm going to fish, but what it has been, leading up to that time. If you're a weekend fisherman, and you're working all week, you watch those weather trends and try to plan for what it's going to be, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's, a really cold weekend like we've got this weekend, or, a good warming trend coming in, because it's going to change the mood of the fish, the location of them. And then when you get to the water, it's all about being real intuitive, breaking down the current conditions, looking at the water clarity, the water temp this time of year, water temperature is critical. Water temperature is overrated though. It's relative. I've learned that bass are a lot more aggressive in colder water than I ever dreamed or thought. You've seen that, as many as we've caught through the ice, but, it still affects them. And, so you got to take into all those variables in that, but the current weather, the water conditions, and then seeing what's changing. If the water's fluctuating, we get a lot of rain this time of year. If the water's rising, if the water's falling, how much, current they're running through the dam, if it's it's a power generation lake or if it's a natural lake. Wind is another factor that can really change the water temperature in certain areas, and just the layout of the lake. Obviously, the sun's in the southern sky, so north facing banks are always going to warm quick. And then if you get a warm south wind, it can really speed that process up. I've seen it early spring here in Michigan, where you get a big warming trend, get a big south wind blow, and those fish will be up in the dirt on that north end of the lake, just because that water temperature will be 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 degrees warmer. And it's just like you and I, when you go to Florida in the winter, you want to go sunbathing, and when it gets hot, you're going to go right where it's at. So there's so many little things that you got to take into account, and it's just about being observant and taking in as many different conditions as you can and making good educated guesses.
So here in Minnesota, one of the things that I'd like is there's a program called Lake Finder that really gives you all the detail on the lakes. But I know you use internet type sources as well for your searches. What are some of the sites and what are some of the things that you're using in your search?
Well, there's a lot of them. You can definitely Google Earth is a great one, because you can see, and especially for lakes like in Florida and along the coastal areas where you can see hidden ponds or creeks, you can see overview, things like that. But there is so much more mapping available, and even just my Lake Master map on my Sonar. I mean, so overview maps are great, but seeing the depth contours on the lakes, any of those Lake Master HD lakes, it's just it's great. And I like to use that shading feature. It's one of those things where if you're focused in the spring of the year and that it's going to be around the spawn or pre-spawn, I'm going to shade those flats and those shallower areas and just really concentrate on those. It just helps me see the big picture and really zoom in. There's a lot of sites that you can go to. You can read a lot of blogs, and in certain areas, there's forums and things you can go on. But so often that information is, last week or a month ago, or people maybe even trying to throw you off. So I really try not to ever look at what other anglers are doing. Tournament results are great, to follow the tours. You can go to the Bassmaster site or the Major League Fishing site and look at all the different events that they have around the country. And, if you're going to make a trip to Sam Rayburn, Texas, it's great to go and look at some of those tournament results and things like that, because nobody's lying about what got caught last weekend in the tournament. But some of these forums and things like that, I'm a little suspect.
The first time I used shading, I as you know, I run Garmin, and the first time I actually ran shading, I underestimated the power of shading. I turned it on. I found a little piece of structure that I had no clue was there, and without shading, I would have blown right by it. And it's a pretty valuable tool. So I think if the sonar that you guys are running has shading, really put it to good use.
Yeah, and the great part about it is you can adjust it for the season of the year, for the depth that you're focusing on. And, if you don't exactly know, it's still a great safety feature. I always shade 5 feet and less in red, and that just shows me starkly that if you're running across the lake, unfamiliar area, and especially with the lake level offset that Humminbird has for Lake Master, if the lake's low or it's high, I can adjust that, the map so it's accurate to the exact water level, and that shading is going to be spot on. And in flooded conditions, it's important because you never know where there's going to be some stuff, obstructions underneath the water or something like that, or especially these lakes with timber and that too. It's just another great tool to keep you safe.
So Kevin, the mapping today is incredible. So everybody really has access to all the spots. There's really no hidden spots there. The guy used to have the offshore spot. It was by the White House and the Pine and this. Yeah. So does that mean in your mind that the classic bass fishing spots are really something that maybe they're overfished now, or do you avoid them? How do you approach that side of things?
Well, that is the case, and especially a lot of the really highly pressured lakes or real famous lakes. You go to Lake Fork in the spring, and these classic structures they're going to get a lot of attention, and especially offshore fishing. I've never look at the map and say, oh, this, super awesome main lake point is going to be right where they're sitting. It's usually some little side edge or, a little spot on the spot or to the side of the spot. And a lot of times that Lake Master map will give me clues to it. You'll see a little flat spot on the side of a point or someplace where the contour lines get a little tighter, or there's a little bit of a regularity in it, and it'll be something that's a bottom composition change. There'll be some rock there. There'll be some rubble. You never know exactly what it is, but the way these maps are made, they actually go and scan the bottom. And so it is precise to a T. So if there's something there irregular, it's there for a reason. And I've learned always to pay attention to those little subtle details on that mapping.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you next was, how do you find spots that other anglers aren't finding? And I think one of the pros that's really good at that is Ott Defoe, who seems to have a knack for finding these little spots. And if you guys, Ott's going to join us right now. He's the winner of the 2019 Bassmaster Classic and the 2020 MLF Bass Tour Stage 3 event. He's finished in the money, an amazing, Kevin, this is insane, 79% of the tournaments he's been in. That's incredible. But he's really well known for finding these hidden hot spots. And I can't wait to bring him on. Ott Defoe, hey, welcome to College of Bass. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah, you bet, Steve. Thank you. And Kevin, good to see you. I've been listening here for the last 10 minutes or so. But yeah, no, great to be on. I really appreciate you all having me on here tonight.
Well, thanks. Kevin, I guess I was going to ask you this, but maybe I'm just going to sit in the back and just listen to you guys. But one of the questions I wanted to ask is, how do you find spots that other anglers aren't finding?
Well, I can tell you this. I've known Ott for a long time, and I've kind of watched him come up. He's a Nitro teammate. He's a Humminbird Minn Kota teammate. And one thing, growing up where he did, he's from Tennessee, Knoxville area there, and he spent a lot of time going up these little creeks and rivers. He's got a special rig just for doing that. And he does the same thing on tour with his Z21. He's going to go and look for those hidden spots and things like that. And where a lot of people are afraid to go more than anything. And he's made a pretty good career out of it. You see, he's wearing camo right now. I mean, yeah. He's a hunter and a fisherman. And what I'm saying is he's hunting for these spots. He spends a lot of time doing it. So Ott, I'm going to let you just kind of take it away a little bit. You got to give up some of the juice.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's one of the questions that I just saw that popped up here a little bit ago was somebody asking if Kevin, if he ever uses Google Earth, for research. And that's a tool that I spend. I wish I had $1 for every hour that I spent on Google Earth, because it is, for a shallow water guy, I can an aerial shot like I can see on Google Earth so much of the time. That tells me so much. I mean, and, a lot of the things that you can use on Google Earth, some of the tools, where you can go back and look at old pictures. A lot of times you can even find some when the water was down on a lot of different fisheries, whether that's drought or just time of year or whatever it may be. But Google Earth for a shallow water guy like me and wanting to find places that are off the beaten path, you may see something that when you're riding down the lake doesn't look like anything, but you look at it on that satellite imagery and can see that, no, this little creek goes back and opens up, or it's got these bends, or that type of stuff. So the satellite imagery is no doubt a very big tool, because like Kevin, I run Humminbird, and we're talking about mapping it. Some of the greatest mapping I think out there is our Lake Master stuff, but unfortunately, some of the places that I go, they weren't able to get their boats in there to map them if they're far enough off the beaten path. They weren't risking tearing stuff up sometimes.
Hey, I got a question for you. So, we all use Google Earth. I carry an iPad in the boat with me when I'm fishing too. Have you seen other mapping sites? So one that I like, because what'll happen is, depending on when they do that satellite imagery, you'll see the lakes at different levels or different times of the year. And that I've used Acme Mapper a lot too. Is there other ones that you use?
Google Earth is honestly the only one I've ever used, Kevin. Other than just,
I should have just gave away the juice there.
You did. I appreciate the heads up. Switching. It's funny because like on your phone, you can only, or an iPad, you only get so much. Like on a laptop, there's so many more features in Google Earth. And you can go back and look at different pictures and stuff. But even just what's on your phone, that Google Earth may have one picture, Google Maps may have another picture, and your Apple Maps may have another picture. So you can get a little bit of different imagery that way. But no, I hadn't heard of any other ones. But yeah, definitely on a a laptop or computer, there's a lot more to Google Earth than just the app that you get on your phone or iPad.
Yeah. What other things? I mean, not just about trying to find a hidden spot or things like that, but a lot of times, especially for people that fish the same lake, I've been to Gunnersville a bajillion times. I've been to Table Rock, and it's easy to get in a rut where you don't look for new things. And, every year lakes are different and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
How do you find stuff? Because I know you're good at this too, that other people just overlook. That's right in front of their face, maybe.
Yeah, that's for me a big thing, and it's funny because as much as I love to go, back up in a creek or whatever like that. Like the tournament that I won, the stage 3 down there at Lake Athens, those fish were caught by a bridge 50 yards from takeoff. So it is a lot of those places that that was a bridge. It was a semi-obvious place, but nobody else had beat up on it that day at that point. And it's so much about looking at your electronics. And honestly, take one of our early events last year where we were about this time last year was down at Eufaula. I had a good start to the year there. And I was looking, you're talking about fish using migration routes and stuff in the kind of places where they go, especially pre-spawn. I knew places where those fish were going to spawn heavily back in some flat bays and that type of stuff. So I knew the places where they were going to be. But out in front of those particular ones on that lower end of Eufaula, it's honestly a lot of flat, very slow tapering type stuff. And I just got out in those areas where most people honestly wouldn't even spend any time side imaging because there's no major depth change. A lot of places where I caught fish, I caught them around brush. So brush was there, people had planted that stuff. But I just spent time graphing in honestly what looked like kind of dead water as far as the mapping is concerned. And a lot of those places I might be sitting in 6.5, throwing to 5. But there would be a piece of cover there. And I never found places, unfortunately, like what Wheeler found where he hit that big school of fish there at the end of the day in the third period to win that event. And I was right up there in the running at the end of the second period. But I would catch a fish or two, and then I may fish 5 brush piles before I catch one. And then I'd catch a fish, but they were big ones. The fish I was catching, I caught a lot of 4 and 5. Had a 7-pounder, I think, there on the last day, but close to a 7-pounder. But that was a big deal, was getting in those areas that don't look so good on the map and looking for any piece of isolated cover. Because if you could find a piece of cover out in those dead areas, you had it to yourself. And it may not be a deal where there's a school of fish, but being able to pick up 1 or 2, run to the next place was a big deal.
Hey, I was going to ask you a question. I know you're a fan of underwater cameras. You're sponsored by Aquaview. How often are you using cameras in your search?
I use them a good bit, Steve, especially on those clear water fisheries. Some of the places where I feel like I was successful because of it, especially come to mind, are the St. Lawrence River up in New York when we fished there. Those fish, those smallmouth, they're curious for one, so you're not going to run them off with a camera. But 2, the good thing, they're generally, if you get a bait in front of them, you put a drop shot down there with some kind of little small plastic, they're probably going to bite it. So in practice, I may look through a place and it looked good, but those fish hang so tight to the bottom, it's honestly hard to pick them up on sonar most of the time. So I could go through, mark a rock pile, drop my camera down, and where I may see one mark, I would see 5, 7, 8 smallmouth swimming around and could judge the size a little bit. I could tell small ones from big ones. I couldn't tell a 2.5 from a 3 1/4 pounder, but that was probably one of the fisheries that has helped, where my camera helped me more than anywhere else.
Right.
Our electronics are getting to the point where the next thing is going to be just X-ray vision. We've got Mega 360. The Hummingbird's just about to launch their Mega Live. I've seen a lot of questions about that. Steve's been using Panoptics. There's not hardly a tournament out there now that the person winning isn't crediting some type of forward facing sonar, and that's the next big frontier, I think, for sure. But it's so critical to have all these other aspects too. Lake Master mapping is unbelievable. I fished, an event last week and did not have it, and you just don't realize how much you use it as a crutch. just makes it, you take it for granted, but
You do.
side imaging, it's all important at one time or another. But this new forward facing sonar, it's just the deal, because when you're side imaging, you don't have your rod in your hand. When you're standing up there on the trolling motor and you see a stump or a brush pile or a school of fish go by, or you see that fish and you can cast to them, that's the next level.
It is, and that's with Lake Master, and that's you run 360 on the bow like I do, and that, I mean, I get on a pattern on a lake I don't know at all. I mean, it doesn't matter if I'm at home or 1,000 miles from home, but if I get on a pattern, these fish are on points and 8 to 10 feet of water, and I'm just running point to point, I don't have to side image it to look to see, okay, well, there's a rock vein here or target there or a clump of grass there. I just run to the next point, drop the trolling motor, boom, right there's where I need to make my cast. That's what I love about it, because side imaging, when that was what we had, it was great. I mean, you could find that stuff. You could make one pass idling it, drop a couple waypoints. You knew where to come back and especially target. Now we just run there, drop the trolling motor. Okay, I need to throw here, I need to throw there. I catch fish, or I don't, I run to the next one.
Yeah, you're following a general pattern. If they're on a lake point or a secondary point, then you're just using your sonar right there at the time to. It's all about efficiency. Everything that we're trying to do, but there is still a lot of intuition. Because you look at, just like in the Bass Pro Tour, there's 80 of the best guys there are out there, and everybody's practicing the same lake, and you're doing the same things, but people still miss a lot of that things, and so much of it is confidence. It's your style, and like you said, you're a shallow water fisherman, but I've seen you fish deep plenty as well. But it's all about fishing your strengths too, and everybody has things they're strong at. Everybody has things they're weak at, and if you are weak at a certain technique, I just urge people to go out and try and work on that. Not when it's the toughest conditions, because you're setting yourself up for failure, but when the fish are biting and it's happening, that's when you want to learn new things. That's when you want to learn how to fish a floating worm, or when you try a new technique. A Ned Rig, don't go when you don't get any bites on anything else. Throw it when they're really biting, and you get a lot of bites on it, and you can learn faster.
And make sure it's the only rod you have in the boat when you leave, so you don't switch back and forth. Because it really, if you dedicate an hour to it, it can make a big difference, or a couple hours. Hey, I wanted to kind of move on another topic. I want to ask you this, and Kevin, I really want to sit back and listen to both of you guys on this. But when do you know if you should stay on fish, and when do you make the decision to move? And Kevin, I will start with you, I guess, on this one, because this is a tough decision.
It is. The anglers are so good now that if you find a special spot, it's hard to leave it and be able to get back on it again. So you got to really think hard about that, especially on some of these lakes where, there's a lot of angling pressure in the area you're in, or the seasonal pattern forces people to be a little more confined and the fish to be a little more confined. In a lot of cases, it's best to stay and just figure out how to catch them in an area that has the potential. I mean, I watched, Ott won an event in La Crosse, Wisconsin a couple years back, fishing, again, the very upper end, fishing, where the water's dumping from one lake into the other, and just kind of went back and forth and kept throwing a bunch of different, just made it happen. And that's something that I think he's really good at, whether it takes a wacky worm or a little swim bait or whatever, he's just got all the rods ready and rigged for anything that they throw at you, whether it's finesse, power, and anything in between. So that's something you got a lot of confidence in doing.
It definitely is. And there are a lot of factors, kind of as you alluded to it, that go into that, answering that question, for every situation. If it's a great spot, but I do kind of have it to myself. There's no other boats in the area. I'll fish, half the day within sight. I don't feel like I'm concerned if somebody else fishing. Then I don't mind to leave, whether that's because I feel like I've caught what I need for the day, or to go practice, to look for other areas, whatever, something like that. But if it's a deal where it's like, man, this is what I've got. This is either my chance to win, or this is my only shot at making a check, I feel like is really grinding in this area, then that's what I'll do. And whether that's an area or literally a spot, I'll kind of work that area. over with. There's been times where I feel like I have maximized those pretty well. That tournament in Wisconsin was one. It was a time where I had basically two places where I felt like I could catch the quality of fish that I needed to catch to win that event. And one was there at that little spillway, and one was down in some grass. But and it was pretty easy. Dogs are fighting a little bit. It was pretty easy to just stay put and just keep casting, because I knew, I knew those fish were there. I knew that there were big fish in that hole, just from what I had already called in the tournament. And it was easy to stay, because I knew I didn't need a lot more bites, to win. But it definitely a lot of factors that go into that. But having plenty of rods rigged up to switch through is a great way to maximize an area.
So, Odd, if you're on a school of fish and you're throwing a swim bait or a jig or whatever, and you've caught 3 or 4 fish, and there's more there, what's your next step in terms of getting 2 or 3 more bites out of that same school? Yeah,
a lot of times it is kind of what you would probably expect, Steve, as the answer there is to drop to something finesse. Honestly, a prime example was that Lake Athens event. I thought that we got one day to pre-fish on Lake Athens for that, where the championship was. And I found a mother lode school of fish. I'm like, I'm going to catch 100 pounds in the first hour. These guys ain't even going to know what hit them. Wow. I mean, it really was. Like I had told Jenny, I said, because I hadn't made the championship at that point. I had called her. I'm like, if I make it to here, I'm going to win. I mean, I was that confident. I don't ever do that. But it was unbelievable school of fish that I found. Like I caught 2 on a jerkbait, and the water just erupts with 2 to 6 pounders. I mean, it was incredible. So of course that's where I'm going to start the tournament, and I start there, and I'm making like 4 casts, and I've not caught one, which blew my mind. And finally, one just bumps the swim bait, didn't get it, and then I catch a decent one. I'm like, and I could even see fish on 360. I could see, a pot of fish over there, but they were so hard to get to bite. And I think I may have caught one on a jerkbait, and I'm throwing, and I know I'm throwing right across them. And then I finally switched to a Nico rig, really something that's pretty finesse, but, something I've got a lot of confidence in. If there's something, now it used to be a drop shot. Honestly, for now, it's a Nico rig. It's something that just that nail weight, wacky style deal that is something I feel like I can, that's the most finessey I can really have a lot of confidence in, and caught, I think, one more fish on that there. So that's kind of the rotation I'll go through. Start with power techniques, and then drop back. And that Nico rig is something that I have put a lot of fish in, in the boat with when the bite gets tough.
Kevin, how do you approach it?
Well, it's kind of the same. I've fished, I love to power fish. That's my strength. And if I have to finesse, I try to power finesse then, where I fish a technique that's finesse, but to be able to do it fast, whether you're just using a heavy weight, or I like a Nico rig too. I learned that you can pretty big nail weight in the head of them and get them down quick and still have that wacky action and cover some water if you need to. But when they're sitting there on a spot, it's hard to beat, especially if they're on the bottom. It's really hard to beat a shaky head or a Ned rig. Those things, both of those two, they're very similar. A Ned rig is like a ultra finesse shaky head to me. It's a stand-up design, and they're just deadly in that situation. Now, if the fish are off the bottom more, that's where that Nico rig is really good. If they're suspended a little bit, or even a drop shot, if they're up off the bottom is really good. But there's so many things, so many tools we have in our arsenal, and people say, man, why don't spinner baits catch them like they used to? Well, spinner baits catch them so good still, but in the same scenario where we used to only have a spinner bait to throw around shallow cover around the bank, now we got swim baits and bladed jigs and square bills and, everything else under the sun that you can throw in there. And they all work, but on one day or another, or your confidence level is a little higher, you can make it work a little better. I have a ton of confidence in a jerkbait, and because of, live coverage in bass tournaments now, you can't keep any of that a secret anymore. People didn't throw jerkbaits in the summer. They didn't throw them at odd times. They didn't throw them in shallow, dirty water. And, after they watched people doing it, now, it's like they're throwing them everywhere. So that's the thing is we don't have any secrets anymore because you can watch it with a cameraman right next to you. It's better than being 50 yards away. You can see, I can watch Ott and see exactly how he's turning the handle when he's cranking a square bill or a deep diving bait or whatever, exactly how he's shaking his Nico rig or how he's letting it fall or if you pay close attention, you can learn so much from it. And I think that's why, watching the tournaments is gotten so popular because guys just want to learn why when the pros show up, because they usually do. It doesn't matter what lake it is, it typically shocks the locals and, tournaments aren't usually won the way they expect. And somebody's doing something different, a different area, fishing a different technique will dominate that event. And that's because people fish their strengths.
Yeah. And that's one thing I wanted to mention on there. You mentioned about power fishing and stuff, Kevin, and I don't know if I've ever told you this or not, but watching you fish, that made me a lot of the angler that I am because it seemed like it didn't matter where you went. You never drag anything. Unless it's just you absolutely have to.
You're not watching everything.
You'll drag your crankbait through the mud, but that's about as slow as you're going to drag anything. And that's, living where I live, crankbaits have always been a major thing here. It's just this part of the country. Cranking has always been a major player in a lot of tournament wins, whether it's local or whatever. And that's the way I always kind of geared my fishing around. If the water was 40, 60, 80, anywhere in between, you can get a reaction bite somewhere out of those fish. And whether that's just my ADHD or whatever, that I want to throw something out there and bring it back and try to make them bite it. And watching you do that over the years and how successful you were with it, that's a lot of the reason that I like to fish that way. And then, was able to kind of make that my, my technique I like best as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I had one other question for you before you leave. What I guess I find it unbelievable that you've been into money in 79% of your tournaments to date. Is there one or two things that you think really contributes to that success for you? How do you develop a record that incredible?
Well, when you start out with very little sponsors and you better get a check in every tournament, you get a check in every tournament. Determination was a major driving factor early on, but honestly, it was a lot, Steve. That was I always in local tournaments. I always prided myself on having a good finish. I never won a lot of bigger local events. Catching a limit was always a major important thing for me. And honestly, when I first started at a kind of a professional level in 2006 with FLW, the first big tournament that I fished, I had a $2,000+ entry fee, 50th place being a $10,000 check. I missed a check in that tournament because on the third day I weighed in 4 instead of 5. If I'd have had another 1.5 pound keeper, I would have gotten a $10,000 check in that tournament, and that would have, I've still not forgotten that, so it was from that point forward catching, because I didn't focus on that day. I caught like 3 or 4 pretty nice fish really early. I'm like, I'm going to catch another one. I could have went out. It was on Lake Lanier. I could have went through a shaky head on almost any point and probably caught a keeper spot and got that check. And I just didn't put enough focus on that early enough in the day. And that from that point forward, I was like, I'm going to do everything I can to catch a limit. And that, in a lot of ways, that kind of was a joke about it, but it was a major driving factor. And it's being consistent, especially that's the start of my career. I love to win, and I have, I thank the Lord that I've been successful in that in the last few years, especially. But so much early in my career, it was I wanted to make the championships, I wanted to make the classics, I wanted to make the Forestwood Cups, I wanted to make the Red Crest. That's at the beginning of the year. That is kind of where I set and say this is goal number 1. And so to do that, avoiding bombs is a major part of that, and I think that's a lot of where that comes from.
Yep. I got one thing to say, man. The harder I work, the luckier I get, and that's what it takes. You're a really hard worker. You put a ton of effort and emphasis into it, and that's where the success comes from. There's no shortcut for hard work.
That's right.
Hey, look forward to watching you this year. Thanks so much for your time tonight. We
appreciate you coming on.
Glad to be on. Yep, absolutely. Thank y'all for asking me, and glad to do it anytime.
Awesome. We'll
you.
see you.
Okay.
Hey, Kevin, one of the questions that came in was from David Nichols last weekend. We would you went deep into jerkbaits last weekend. He had a question that I think it's really good. What do you do when a bass comes up fast? And he must be watching forwards. He must have bad optics or something. But if a bass comes up fast, stops right at the jerkbait, and you can't get them to trigger. I mean, he's changing colors, he's changing size, he's changing cadence. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I'm watching them close. So that's one thing that is absolutely critical when I'm fishing a jerkbait in clear water. I'm always looking behind that as far as I can see it from the boat. Eyewear is just something that again, I can't stress enough to have high quality sunglasses. I wear Oakley's, their prism lenses are really good, but I want to pick a shade that fits the light condition. And again, I'm looking behind that bait. If I see one coming, I'm watching exactly how he's moving. If I'm twitching that jerkbait along and he's moving with it every single time, I'm going to get that fish to bite 9 times out of 10, because it's just, then I know he's really excited. It's just a matter of getting that bait to really move real fast and turn. They don't like it when that bait turns back and faces them. So I'm trying to really pop it real hard with just a little, forward movement. So I'm really going to jerk a bunch of slack and really get that bait to jump and just almost turn in place. You want it to walk the dog like a Zara spook, but do it really, really fast. And a couple of quick turns like that, sometimes it's 1 pop, sometimes it's 2 or 3, but I'll just, try to get that fish to go. If they're a little more timid, a lot of times that tells me that my color's not quite right. That I might need to adjust that. It's too bright, it's too flashy, or something doesn't look fully natural to them to get them to commit. So, but when they're moving like that, it's usually just the movement of the bait, and that's why I use the equipment that I do. I want to use fluorocarbon. You got to make that bait jump when you pop it, especially in the warmer times of the year. It's all about the action. I don't think a lot of people truly understand that aspect of a jerk bait. Just having it stop and start in the water is good, but if you can really get that bait super erratic to never go the same place twice when you jerk it, that's what a good jerk bait and it's all about the bait, the line, the rod, and you, the angler, to get that presentation.
So when do you start tweaking the presentation? Say you're hooking fish on the back hook of the bait, or you're seeing things that they're biting, but they're not really committing. How do you go through your progression in terms of tweaking the presentation?
That's exactly it. If they're just nipping the bait, you're getting them just on the tail hook, and or you're losing some like that, or they're just following it. That's what I'm thinking. I'm looking at the sky conditions. I'm looking at the water clarity. I'm thinking about what the primary forage is, that these fish should be feeding on. And I'm going to adjust the color or the size of that bait. Maybe I need to downsize the bait just for that. So, we just came out with a brand new finesse jerk bait this year from Strike King. It's a little 100 series bait. It's smaller profile, and it's just for that, for those really tough conditions. It's really bright, it's slick, it's real clear, and a jerkbait is just even then too loud. That's when this smaller, subtle, really lively, real erratic presentation really comes in. So downsizing is always something. When you get tough bite or fish that are timid, downsizing is always, in any presentation, a good first choice.
Hey, go back to your glasses. What lenses are you running with on, say, clear water? What lenses how do you pick the lenses you're going to wear that day?
So my favorite all-around lens that I wear most of the time in the Oakleys is they build one called a shallow water prism. And their prism technology, it's a lens coating technology that just really cuts down the glare. It allows you to see. It's kind of a green mirror type image over an amber base, a light amber base. And I think that an amber base is pretty much the way you should go for most situations. If I'm not trying to see into the water, see grass, fish, structure, bait, the bass themselves, you can use a smoke lens, but most people use smoke-based sunglasses for their fishing, and that's probably the worst color to see in the water with. Amber, light tan, light yellow, those are going to be the ones to do. Now there are some new lighter smoke lenses that they've got coming that they're pretty dang awesome too. So it's all about the sky conditions. On real bright days, you can get away with some darker lenses, but you want lighter colored lenses on those cloudy days, overcast, things like that. If you see me in tournaments, you'll see I'm wearing those light colored lenses on those days.
I'm amazed we're already 44 minutes into the thing. And I'm like, wow, it seems like we started a couple minutes ago. But I really want to go deep dive into Finesse. And Ott really kind of led into it that he switches. And I know you switch into it, Finesse techniques to try to work more schools. But kind of take me through a couple of Finesse techniques, the shaky head and the Ned Rig. The Ned, I know you've got an interesting history with Ned Katie. Can you kind of share that side of it?
Yeah, so the Ned Rig came from Ned Katie. I mean, he's from Kansas. He was writing for In Fisherman, and I was doing a story with him, and I was using the Strike King Zeros. I was wacky rigging them, and I just that 3X material is just super durable, and it's real buoyant, has a real slow sink to it, and I was having a lot of success with this. This was a long time ago, and I showed him that. I gave him some bags of them, and Ned, the tinker that he is, he took it and did the same thing. But when they kind of got wore out, he's like trying to figure out a way to kind of use those baits more. So he cut them in half and put them on a gopher head and started fishing them around some of those highly pressured lakes by his house, and just found he's catching fish like crazy. And he came back to me and told me about it, and I thought, whatever, it's just one of those things. I've seen several things in my career like that where I could have had a leg up on a really awesome technique. The Sluggo was one back in the day.
Yeah.
I got to see that beforehand. But so the Ned Rig was born really just by somebody that was looking at something a whole different way than I would have ever thought. He just, that's what it is, and that's the innovation that happens in our sport. But a Ned Rig to me is basically the next level finesse version of a shaky head. They're both designed to make the presentation stand up. They're both the most effective if you're fishing them in hard bottom areas or clean bottom areas, I should say, more than anything. They're not really good in heavy grass or vegetation or slime or anything like that. But if you got sand, gravel, rocks, that's where that shaky head just really stands out. And I mean, that really came from that area of Alabama down there in the Coosa River, down near Birmingham in that area. And one of the guys that used to fish on tour, his name was Fred Taco Bland, we called him. So Fred Bland, he used to build the shaky heads, and that's when I learned about it. We were just throwing a finesse worm on it, and it just, instead of throwing a Texas rig, it just totally changed the action, gave it a lot more wiggle to it. Again, that stand-up design and the way it falls and everything, and it's really, really effective, and it still is today. And I use a shaky head style bait or a shaky head style rigging on a lot of other baits too. You can use it on creature baits and
Draws, yeah.
I mean, just stick worms, things like that. It totally changes the action of it. And the same with a Ned Rig. You don't just have to use just a stick worm on there. People are learning that, a baby Z2 is one of my favorites. It's a little soft plastic jerk bait that you put on a Ned head, and it's dynamite. So there's a lot of different options that you can use. But the idea is having something that makes a lot of movement and noise and just really maximize the action, stays in the strike zone for a long time, that the fish can't handle when it gets in front of them.
So I've got a few photos I want to share. I know there's different types of head shapes. There's the round head style. There's the football head style. And here's this is actually a Berkeley head. And then there's another style that's more of that, goes back to that. That's the side profile, but it's the mushroom style head that really kind of started it. And this is a Fusion 19 head. When do you go with round head? When do you go to football? When do you go to other jig style, the head styles? How do you make those decisions?
Well, it's really the bait and how clean the bottom is. Honestly, a football head style on a shaky head really makes it even stand up straighter and taller. And so I like to use that if I'm fishing clean gravel and things like that. If I'm around more cover or it's more snaggy, kind of hanging up, just a standard ball head, shaky head. You know, I use the Strike King tour grade heads. They both make both football and standard in that. And then they make their own, you know, Ned style heads, which is really flat on the top. You know, it's kind of a more than a gopher head, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's straight flat. So and the underwater footage, you know, it's unbelievable. So I've spent a lot of time looking at baits underwater, and it's taught me a lot. And that's where that head design really came from, where it's totally flat on the top and the eyes out the side for the Strike King Ned head. So it makes that stand up. You know, I mean, the original design is using that 3X material that's real buoyant, even though it's got some salt in it. It floats, so it's forcing the tail to stand up off the bottom. Where, you know, if you've got the right head design, you can make any soft plastic, you know, stand up a lot more.
So there's a ton of choices in worms today, you know. So if you were to really highlight the attributes of a good worm for shaky head, so what kind of length are you talking about? What type of design? You know, that sort of thing.
Well, when I'm finesse fishing, no doubt, day in, day out, my bait go-to is a Strike King Fat Baby Finesse worm. It's a 5-inch worm, and it's just dynamite. It's got a kind of a little rattlesnake type tail on it that's got a flat spot on it, and it just adds a ton of action to it. It's a little beefier profile. You know, I'd sent you some pictures of a couple of the different baits that I like, but that one is day in, day out a go-to. Again, don't be scared to throw it. You know, other baits on it. You can see I've got it rigged both ways there. So in real clean open areas, I'll just stick that hook exposed like you would on a swim bait or a tube or something. But the shaky head style is where you've got it, you know, Texas rigged like that. You can see there's game hog there, a little creature bait. That's one of my favorites on a shaky head. It totally changes the action compared to a Texas rig. Here's some Ned heads there, and you can see that flat design where it makes it stand straight up, and, you know, a couple of different baits. But day in, day out, that little stick worm, that Ned Ocho, is hard to beat. It's just the lighter the head you can use with any shaky head or Ned head just maximizes the action. I know it's painful to throw that 16th ounce head or, you know, a really light weight. But the lighter the head, the better the action. And if you know where the fish are sitting, that's the thing to do. But going back to how, you know, we power finesse, I'm not scared to pitch it out there on a pretty heavy head, let it hit the bottom like a bowling ball, and work it a little bit quicker when I'm trying to cover water too. You still get that great action, and you know, it just allows you to fish it a little faster and cover more water.
You know, it's funny. Colors are one of those things that a lot of people have definite preferences, and I may think probably there's more green pumpkin type worms sold than anywhere. But what are some of your favorite colors in terms of just general, you know, green pumpkin, or what do you like to run with?
Yeah, so I do a lot in natural colors in clear water, like green pumpkin and watermelons, shades of that. But I like dark colors too, just straight black. A black Fat Baby Finesse worm is one of my favorites. Morning Dawn is another one that's really, really good for me. It's got, you know, that kind of pink and blue. It's very bait fishy looking, can be really good. It really depends on the water clarity. You know, a shaky head is still super effective in stained to dirty water. And that's where you want to use, you know, Tequila Sunrise or black, or these darker colors, or, you know, colors that stand out, even June Bug, you know. So, you know, it's one of those things that you can just look at that.
And this isn't just a bait for small fish. I know you've had double-digit fish on shaky heads in the past. There, at least if my memory serves properly.
Yeah, I caught the lake record at Lake Louisville on a shaky head. You know, it was a late spring tournament, and just, you know, I was catching fish on the rocks on the dam, and threw out there with a spinner rod 8-pound line and caught an 11-13. So it's not just a little fish bait. I've caught a lot of big fish on it, and you can use a magnum size, you know, in the summer tournaments at Kentucky Lake, ledge fish and things like that. I'll use, you know, a bigger Strike King bull worm and rig it the same way, you know, just on a bigger head, heavier head, and fish it that way too. I mean, it's just really effective. It's about the action that it provides.
I was in the boat with Gary Klein in Guntersville, and I was shocked how big some of the bass he was throwing and how heavy the shaky heads were. But he were catching fish in 25, 30 feet of water, and so it's a technique that's not necessarily just finesse either in terms of going heavier and big.
Yeah, it's all about efficiency, and you can, get that bait down there, and you're trying to target these bigger fish in tournaments like that. So, using a big profile bait, but still using that finesse approach, it's really effective, especially for pressured fish.
So when you're throwing a Ned Rig, what pound test are you typically running? What liner you run? And tell me a little bit about the rod that you're using.
Yeah, I use the same type of rod for a shaky head. Pretty light tip. I like a longer rod. I've grown up in the Great Lakes. If you're fishing open water, I want a longer rod just to cast further. A 7.2, 7.4, even a 7.6, kind of a medium action, medium light. You want something with a soft tip, and I'm going to use 8-pound test fluorocarbon for the most part. Now I think most of us are making that transition to where we're using small diameter braid. Tying a leader to it and I use an FG knot to do that. That's the knot that everybody has to learn. It's a little trickier. It's a little more, takes longer, but it is truly exponentially the best knot to go through your guides to cast, and it's just not going to break, So I'll use a little longer leader in real clear water situations, but that braid just gives you the sensitivity. You can get the distance. You don't have to worry about the line twist. And, that light line makes a difference. I'll go to 6 at times, but only in the ultra clear water for pressured fish. 8-pound is usually pretty good.
Hey, we've had a ton of questions come in. I wanted to get to a couple of them before we run out of time. But one of the questions that just came in is, how come nobody talks about tubes anymore?
Well, tubes, where I live here in Michigan, we sell a ton of them. My brother's store here, DNR Sports there, they have just 100 bags of them still. It's still a mainstay bait in this region in the Great Lakes for smallmouth. The thing about a tube is it just imitates so many different things depending on how you fish it. I mean, you can snap it along the bottom and make it look like a crawfish, a goby, a perch. You can let it fall on a light head and it's swimming down like a bluegill. You can flip them. I mean, they're erratic in nature by the way that you fish them. So it's the same thing. Some of these other techniques have come up that have, fell into the limelight, whether it's Nico rigging or Ned rigging, but tubes still catch them the same way a spinnerbait does.
And we had a Lance Cooper asked a question. He said, will a bladed jig work just as good in rocks as it does over grass?
Yeah, I love a bladed jig in grass for sure, because you can get that bait in there and rip it out. But it's the same way. Deflecting, if you're fishing in shallower areas, that's the thing about that bait is it's got a lot of lift. So it's hard to fish it, 15, 20 feet down. I mean, they make heavier ones now. The Strike King Thunder Cricket comes up to a 3/4 ounce bait, and I'll throw it in deeper areas, but it's typically more on deeper grass edges. But if I've got a lot of shallow rocks and that, it's such an effective bait to trigger big fish. They love that vibration, or they can't stand that vibration, whatever it is, and they'll bite it. So in rocky areas, it's still, and it's great for smallmouth bait too. I've learned that smallmouth love a bladed jig.
And we've had several questions on the best video for FG knot. I just Google it, take a look at it. If we have anything that we find, we'll recommend it next week. But that is a great knot.
There's a lot of great videos that you can see.
Yeah.
I learned the way that I tie it from Casey Ashley. So, we room together, him and my nephew, Jonathan, and Marty Robinson. We stay together a lot on the road, and everybody, all three of those guys have a different little nuance in the way that they tie it. The way that you got to keep all the lines tight, and that's the tricky part. But, Casey kind of taught me his way, and I moved it, and it works for me.
Hey, there is a question. Now, what's your opinion on spy baits for pre-spawn? And I have a comment after this one.
Yeah, so spy baits are something, I won a tournament in New York using one quite a bit a couple years ago for smallmouth. And that was a, summer tournament or early fall tournament. But I've learned that they're very effective in just about any situation where the fish are up in the water column and you have some clarity. It's visually an attractive bait, just the way that it shimmies, the wiggle that it has. It's slow, it's subtle, it's an easy meal. It looks like a wounded or an injured shad. And I've had great success in places like Table Rock or Smith Mountain, Smith Lake in Alabama. Those are lakes that are clear like that. And in the pre-spawn, those fish will do it. And again, all three species, smallmouth, largemouth, and spots, they'll do that. It's just tricky if you're fishing in some of these lakes with standing timber in that, because it's not very weedless. In that sense, and they are expensive. I've got a box full of them, and there's a lot of money tied up there in those baits, but they are very effective in that situation for suspended fish, and that's the pre-spawn in winter is one of the key times.
First time I had a chance to fish spy baits on a pre-spawn smallmouth, I was fishing with live scope and actually was able to watch the bait and the fish. And I know you've made a comment in the past. You think that bait companies might be building baits specifically for forward sonar coming up pretty soon because of just the amount of information you can have.
Yeah, with so much interest right now in Mega Live, and Lowrance just launched theirs, and Garmin's had theirs out now for a while, and just about everybody on tour is crediting it for their success in some way, shape, or form. They're very helpful. It's just so we've always been able to see under the boat, but now we can see around the boat. Yeah, and we can see it in real time while we're actually have your rod in your hand and your bait in your hand, and that's when you still got to make the fish bite, but it's definitely shortening that time to search and find them.
Well, I can't believe it, dude. It's 8 o'clock. We're gonna have to close out here tonight, but I want to let everybody know that our guest next week is going to be Gene Jensen, better known as the Fluke Master on his real popular YouTube channel. We're going to talk about organization for efficiency on the water, which one of the things that clearly you're an expert at as well. And then I love this topic. We're going to talk about power spinner baiting, and we're going to go in depth with you on that, which is pretty exciting stuff.
A lot of people have put the spinner baits kind of in the back of their tackle box, or where they pick other baits first. Bladed jigs and square bills and things. But a spinner bait is still an amazing bait. Something that it's so efficient for so many different depth zones and cover types, and it imitates a lot of different types of bait fish, and that's what bass eat. So it's prime time for it. Spring is the beginning of really good spinnerbait fishing, and it's something that I got a ton of confidence in.
Awesome. Hey, we got a winner tonight for the the Plano prize pack tonight, and Kai, let's bring up the winner tonight.
Brock Watkins. He's going to get the prize pack tonight. Again, thanks for sending in the questions, and you're going to like it, man. There's a lot of great stuff from Plano, a lot of the new Edge boxes and KVD bag. Of course, you're going to get one of these College of Bass Yeti cups, thanks to Yeti for supporting us, and that Strike King lure kit. So we're going to give one away every week, and appreciate everybody tuning in and all the great questions.
Awesome. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next Wednesday at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, right here on the Facebook pages. And again, if you want to revisit some of the things that were covered tonight or last episode, just go back to the Facebook page that you caught us on, or YouTube channels, and check it out. But hey, thanks for joining us, Kevin. Have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next week, man.
Sounds great, man. Have a good one.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching The College of Bass. Join us for an all-new episode every Wednesday night.